Talk to enough beekeepers at different elevations, and you'll notice something that never quite gets explained properly. The ones running hives up in the mountains almost never mention small hive beetles as a real problem, while beekeepers in the lowlands, a couple hours drive away, are fighting them constantly, season after season, with traps and treatments and a running frustration that never seems to fully resolve. It isn't luck, and it isn't a different species of beetle up there. It's the same pest, the same biology, the same insect that's causing headaches everywhere else. It comes down to two conditions the beetle absolutely cannot do its job without, and mountain elevation happens to strip away both of them at once, without a single beekeeper up there doing anything intentional about it. Here's the full story. Let me start with what the small hive beetle actually needs to succeed, because once you understand its two non-negotiable requirements, the mountain question answers itself. The damage from small hive beetles doesn't come from the adults wandering around your hive. It comes from the larvae, and the larvae only exist because a female beetle mated, laid her eggs inside the hive, and then, critically, those larvae had to leave the hive, drop to the ground, and burrow into soil to complete their transformation into new adults. That pupation stage in the soil is the single most vulnerable link in the entire beetle life cycle, and it is also the most specific about its requirements. Research on the species is direct about this. The beetle needs warm, humid conditions to reproduce and complete that soil stage successfully. Take away the warmth, take away the humidity, and the cycle doesn't just slow down. It frequently fails outright. This is why environments associated with high temperature and high humidity, the same conditions found around honey extracting facilities, incidentally, which is why those buildings have their own beetle problems entirely separate from anything happening out in the actual apiary, are exactly where beetle populations explode fastest and hardest. And it's why the opposite conditions, cold and dry, are where beetle populations quietly struggle to establish at all, no matter how many adult beetles might drift in from somewhere else looking for a place to breed. There's an added layer to this worth understanding too. Researchers studying the species have documented that low-level, cryptic reproduction can occur even in hive debris without any visible signs of colony damage, meaning a beetle population can be quietly building somewhere in a hive's less inspected corners long before a beekeeper notices anything wrong. That makes prevention through environmental conditions even more valuable than reactive control, because by the time visible damage shows up, the reproductive cycle may have already been running successfully behind the scenes for a while. Now think about what a mountain environment actually does to those two variables, because it attacks both of them simultaneously, which is rare. Elevation drives temperature down in a remarkably consistent physical way. Air temperature falls by roughly 6.5 degrees Celsius for every 1,000 meters you climb. That's not a minor adjustment. A mountain apiary, sitting at real elevation, is running meaningfully cooler, on average, than a valley apiary the beetle would thrive in. And cooler soil is soil that slows or halts pupation. Beekeepers who actually keep bees at high elevation describe exactly this kind of environment, without necessarily connecting it to beetle pressure. One experienced high-elevation beekeeper at 7,000 feet in the Colorado Rockies describes humidity that stays low year-round, alongside rapid cool-downs after sunset, even when daytime temperatures climb. That combination, low ambient humidity plus a soil environment that never stays warm and wet for long, is close to the opposite of what a beetle needs underground to survive its most vulnerable stage. Mountain terrain compounds this in a second way that has nothing to do with temperature directly. High-elevation apiaries are frequently sited on drier ground, often rockier or more well-drained than the damp bottomland soil common in lowland beekeeping. And that drainage matters enormously for a soil-dwelling larva that depends on retained moisture to survive its transformation. Well-drained, sun-exposed mountain soil essentially removes the second requirement on the beetle's checklist, even in months where temperature alone wouldn't fully stop it. So you have cooler air, cooler soil, lower ambient humidity, and often better drained ground, all occurring together simply because of where the apiary sits on a map. None of this is beekeeper skill. It's geography doing pest control for free, and it's a genuinely different mechanism than most of the forbidden knowledge-style tricks this channel usually covers. There's no product, no plant, no cheap fix. It's elevation itself doing the work. Quick word before I continue. Everything I've learned about siting an apiary to work with these kinds of natural pressures instead of against them. Sun exposure, ground conditions, elevation effects, the whole picture. I gathered it all into the Hive Vault at daleshive.com. The link's in the video description below and on the channel page if you want it. This video's free and always will be. The Vault's just the long version for folks who want the whole thing. I won't mention it again. Here's where this gets genuinely useful even if you don't live anywhere near real elevation. Because the mountain beekeeper isn't benefiting from something mystical. They're benefiting from a specific physical combination of factors. And you can recreate a version of those factors on flat ground if you understand exactly what's doing the work. The core insight from the beetle's biology is unambiguous on this point. The primary and most effective control method is prevention through ensuring conditions that don't favor beetle reproduction. And specifically, that means denying the larvae warm, humid soil to pupate in. A mountain beekeeper gets this by accident, through elevation. A lowland beekeeper can get a meaningful piece of the same effect deliberately. Full sun exposure on the hive stand and the ground beneath it is the single most direct lowland equivalent of what altitude does automatically. Beetle eggs and the environment larvae need to thrive are documented as being highly vulnerable to drying out, desiccating readily when relative humidity around the hive stays low with decent airflow. A hive sitting in dappled shade over damp ground is functionally recreating the warm, humid conditions a beetle needs. The same hive moved into full sun, on ground that drains and dries quickly, is pushing conditions toward the same hostile environment a mountain apiary has by default. Ground preparation is the second lever, and it's the one that most directly mirrors what well-drained mountain soil does. Dry, bare, sun-exposed ground under and around a hive stand denies pupating larvae the moisture they need. Some beekeepers go further and pour a concrete pad under the hive specifically because larvae cannot burrow into it at all, an artificial version of the same nowhere-to-pupate outcome that rocky mountain soil produces on its own. And colony strength still matters enormously, regardless of elevation, because a strong, populous colony actively patrols its own comb and drives beetles into corners and cracks where they can't establish the same defensive behavior that makes traps effective in the first place. Altitude removes one leg of the beetle's survival strategy. A strong colony removes another. Stack both, wherever you happen to be keeping bees, and you're recreating a meaningful piece of what makes mountain apiaries so quiet on this particular problem. I want to be fair about the other side of this, because mountain beekeeping isn't a beetle-proof paradise across the board. It trades one set of problems for a different one entirely. High-elevation beekeepers deal with a shorter, more compressed nectar season, since altitude flora often blooms for only a few weeks at a time, with narrow, concentrated flow windows rather than the longer, staggered season a lowland apiary might enjoy. They deal with genuine cold hardiness demands, needing hives insulated against temperatures that regularly drop enough to threaten brood if the colony can't maintain its cluster temperature. Some mountain beekeepers even contend with wildlife pressure most lowland keepers never think about, including bears drawn by the scent of honey and brood, requiring real deterrents like electric fencing that a suburban beekeeper would never need to consider. So this isn't a story about mountain beekeeping being easier. It's a story about one specific pest problem being almost entirely solved by conditions that create several other problems in its place. The lesson isn't move to the mountains. It's understand precisely which two conditions a beetle needs and recognize that you can deny it both of them on any land if you're deliberate about sun, drainage, and colony strength. You're just doing consciously and by design what the mountain beekeeper gets automatically from the elevation they happen to be standing on. Here are the mistakes people make when trying to apply this lesson without understanding the actual mechanism. Mistake 1 is assuming cooler weather alone solves the problem. Temperature matters, but the humidity and soil drainage piece is doing just as much work. A cool, damp, shaded lowland apiary can still support beetles even in a cooler climate, because the moisture half of the equation is still present. Mistake 2 is siting hives for the beekeeper's convenience, near a house, under a shade tree for comfort during inspections, rather than for the colony's actual advantage. Full sun is uncomfortable to work in during summer, and that discomfort is exactly why so many hives end up shaded when they'd be better off baking in direct light. Mistake 3 is ignoring what's directly under the hive. Beekeepers spend enormous energy on in-hive beetle traps, while the ground beneath the stand, where the larvae actually go to complete their life cycle, gets no attention at all. That soil is the most vulnerable link in the entire chain, and it's usually the most neglected. Mistake 4 is treating colony strength and environmental siting as separate strategies, rather than a combined system. A weak colony on perfect, dry, sunny ground still struggles with beetles because there aren't enough bees to patrol the comb. A strong colony in damp shade still fights an uphill battle because the ground beneath it is doing nothing to help. Both levers need to be pulled together. Picture a lowland apiary deliberately built around the same two conditions that mountain elevation provides for free. Hives sitting in full, uninterrupted sun rather than tucked into comfortable shade. Dry, bare, well-drained ground underneath. Sun-baked earth or even a concrete pad instead of damp grass or mulch. Strong, well-managed colonies with enough bees to patrol every frame. None of that requires elevation. It requires understanding that a small hive beetle has exactly two things it cannot succeed without: warmth and humidity in the soil, and building an apiary that denies it both, the same way 6,000 feet of elevation does without anyone up there even trying. The mountain beekeeper isn't smarter about beetles. The mountain is just quietly doing the work for them. Now you know exactly what that work is and how to do it yourself, wherever you happen to keep your bees. Drop a comment and tell me your elevation and whether beetles have ever been a real problem for you. I read every single one at Dale's Hive, and if you want the full apiary siting guide, sun, drainage, colony strength, all of it, it's waiting in the vault at Dale's Hive. Link in the video description. Subscribe and turn on notifications because next week we're covering exactly how to build a beetle-proof hive stand from the ground up using these same two principles. Two conditions, that's all a beetle needs, and that's all it takes to stop it. The mountain never had a secret. It just never let the beetle have either one.